Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give a few minutes for everyone to get into the webinar. While you're coming in, please feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat. Introduce yourself. We'll get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone. We're just letting all the participants get into the webinar. While we're doing that, people are introducing themselves in the chat, so go ahead and do that. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay. It looks like we're slowing down who's coming in, so hopefully we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's really great to see people here from all different parts of the country, different roles. So this webinar is accessing legal services and changing laws to end youth homelessness. It's presented in partnership by a variety of different organizations you can see listed here. Today we'll have speakers Ria Yo, from Director of Legal Services at Legal Counsel for Youth and Children in Washington State, presenting with Elizabeth Dawson, a youth advocate. And then we'll have Kelly Russo, the Director of the ABA Homeless Youth Legal Network, presenting after that. And then finally, Gabriella McDonald, the Deputy Director of Texas Appleseed, will present. We'll talk about legal services and accessing legal services. We'll talk about the resources that are available for young people who want to access legal services. And we'll talk about legislative advocacy resources that are available for young people and advocates to change laws when the legal services aren't enough, when we're coming up against barriers that the only solution is to change them and remove them. All right, and without further ado, I will pass it on to our first presenters.
Good afternoon. My name is Ria Yo at Legal Counsel for Youth and Children. I'm a Director of Legal Services and attorney for young people. I've been attorney for young people throughout the country, in DC, in California, and now in Washington State, both through dependency and youth in foster care, and also youth experiencing housing instability. I'm here presenting with my colleague and former client, Elizabeth Dawson, who I will have introduce herself. Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Dawson. I am a senior in high school, and I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, so we have a icebreaker question for you guys. Put it in the chat if you can. What is your favorite boba order? So Ria, what is your favorite boba order?
My favorite boba order is taro tea, but like the smoothie version. So it's kind of like a milkshakey taro tea, and always with the tapioca balls with the boba. I don't think it's boba tea or bubble tea without the tapioca balls. And
I agree.
what's your favorite order, Elizabeth?
In general, I usually go for the OG milk tea, which is the black milk tea, I guess, also with the tapioca balls. It's not, like you said, it's not boba without the tapioca balls. So,
yeah. But I think it's a controversial take. There's many people who are not into it. Yes. And I just, as framing, our section of the presentation will be a conversation between Elizabeth and I about our shared advocacy in supporting Elizabeth, and a few years ago when she was a client with LCYC. All right, so if we can move on to the next slide. So Elizabeth, to talk a little bit about why a youth experiencing housing instability might need a lawyer, why did you need a lawyer as a young person who was experiencing housing instability?
I needed a lawyer because my legal guardian passed away, and I was living with my uncle and my younger brother at the time, so it was like the four of us. And then when my legal guardian passed away, I just didn't feel like he was capable of taking care to minors, and I just did not feel safe in that environment at all. So I had to leave that situation and take my younger brother with me to another sibling that we have that's older and is an adult and has roommates. So yeah.
And at that time, it wasn't you were like, oh, my legal guardian passed, and so I need a lawyer. It was someone else, maybe, and it was someone else in your life who thought about a lawyer might be able to help. So who was it in your life that helped you get connected to a lawyer?
The person in my life that helped me get connected to a lawyer was my therapist from Asian Counseling and Referral Services. She has known my family for about 5 years at that time, and so she really understood our dynamics, and she decided that there's limitations to her job, so she decided to make a referral to LCYC, and yeah.
And so she made that referral. I connected to you. And if we can move to the next slide. And I connected to you, and you identified these issues of wanting to access safety and also accessing stable housing. And so what were your goals though for your living situation?
My main goal was to not be in foster care because I was prioritizing family, and I thought, if I put myself back into foster care, if I chose that route, then I would have less of like control on my living situation. So I decided to, be on my own and be independent and being able to decide where I stay. Um, but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What is special about an unaccompanied minor being able to talk to a lawyer?
Yeah, what's on the slide is like two really important things that if you get anything out of this, especially for, some of the direct services folks in the room, is that lawyers, we are not mandated reporters. And also lawyers our clients are the youth, right? And so we are directed by them. And so that's the unique role that we play. And I will say that's the case in Washington State. There might be other states that might have different mandatory reporting laws, but lawyers in Washington State are not mandated reporters. And for someone like yourself, Elizabeth, who was like one of my goals, my housing goals and legal goals is not to go into foster care. You had to be very careful about who you talk to and what you say, right? Because depending on most of the professional adults in your life, we're gonna be mandated reporters, and so I was able to have a much more open, direct, problem-solving conversation with you about your situation and about what you wanted and what your options were. And that I remember those early conversations, right? It was very much about like problem solving, about like showing you, okay, here are your options. What are the pros and cons? And you did not have to fear that based on what you tell me, I was going to have to call CPS or the police. Um, Next slide, please. So we talked about your housing goals, but there are other goals that you had beyond just housing. Young people many times, most of the time, have multiple legal needs. So what were some of your other goals as an unaccompanied minor?
My other goals were education. So I wanted to stay in the same school that I was already in like before my legal guardian passed away, and I was really adamant about that because I just I thought that it would be really helpful, and to stick around a familiar space, you know. So I just thought, you know, I want to stay in that school and finish it, and then, you know, start a new year. But the other thing is accessing healthcare.
And let's talk a little bit more about both of those. And let's first talk about school. So what were some of the problems you were facing when you were trying to get to school?
When I moved to my older brother's place, he lived in a different city, and so the fact that I wanted to stay in Seattle, I had to commute, right? So it was 2 hours each way, and that meant I had to wake up early in the morning and come home a little later. I had no problem with it though, because I was familiar with the public transportation system already. So I actually enjoyed it because, you know, I had alone time and time to like chillax before studying and stuff. So yeah, that was it was cool and fun, but sometimes it was also like frustrating because other kids around me don't have to do that. And also I had problems with McKinney-Vento taxi service because their taxi service is directly to and from school, and so and that would they would take away my unlimited Orca card that Seattle provided for all high school students. And so I really prioritize keeping that card because I wanted freedom to hang out with friends or do other after school activities. So what did you do as my lawyer to advocate for me in school?
Yeah. I mean, first was trying to get you enrolled, right, in McKinney-Vento. There were some delays in that happening. I think there was some misunderstanding about your eligibility for McKinney-Vento, and sort of making sure that the liaison understood your situation and how it fit into the law. But once we were able to get you connected and enrolled, they were, you know, very responsive and actually started to engage in our team meeting. So that was one of the ways I advocated was, you know, you had lots of different people in all these different areas, and you were in the sort of difficult position of having to like communicate to different people, and us communicating to you. So like your school counselor, your McKinney-Vento liaison, your therapist, your lawyer, your all these your brother at the time who was taking care of you. And basically we were like, let's all come together in a Zoom room and like do this together, right? And so we were having these weekly or biweekly team meetings, and we invited the McKinney-Vento liaison and school counselor to come when they could. And and I think that was really instrumental in helping them understand your situation, and also like reminding them about some of the things that you needed. And ultimately, in terms of the transportation, it was actually a non-legal solution that really was the most helpful, which was that your therapist connected with an old family support person from your elementary school, Miss Nina, who actually was not living too far away from where your brother was staying. And both of you were commuting from, you know, outside of Seattle into Seattle. And so we used that as an opportunity for you to get transportation in the morning with Miss Nina, and then for you to be able to use your free Orca card um, to you know, be able to do what you wanted to do after school with activities and friends, and then come home. I do want to say that since this experience, Elizabeth reminded me that the law has changed. So like anyone under 18 can ride for free without needing the Orca card from school. So that's been an improvement. But at the time, that was your situation. Um, so that was school, some of the stuff you needed help with school. What were some of the problems you were facing accessing healthcare?
Well, actually, it was really confusing at the time because I was able to set up appointments without needing a legal guardian. However, when I came in and wanting healthcare service, they denied me, and they explained why, because I don't have a legal guardian. But then when they told me other solutions, and I tried those solutions, they also denied me again. So there was this one time where they asked for a note, and when I tried to give it to them, they didn't allow, like, they didn't accept it. And then I tried taking my older brother, who was over 21 at the time, to come and take me, and he had to commute all the way out of the city just to take me to a doctor's appointment, and that didn't work. Um so yeah, it was just really frustrating. And yeah, so what did you do as my lawyer to access healthcare?
So at the time in Washington State, the only way for a minor to be able to consent themselves to routine healthcare was a law or a case law that's called the mature minor doctrine. So that means it wasn't like law on the books, it was law from like someone bringing a lawsuit, and it was something that was optional for medical care providers to use to allow minors to consent themselves. And so I wrote a letter to your healthcare provider, and you know, your primary care provider was your primary care provider for a while and knew you well and wanted to give you healthcare, but they obviously are just one of a big, much larger, you know, organization and company, healthcare company. And so they were able to utilize my letter to bring it up to their, you know, chain of command to be able to apply the mature minor doctrine. So I was able to demonstrate like what the law is, what they're allowed to do, how you meet the standard for the laws. And if I recall, we also had supportive letters from other providers to say like, yes, this is what I've seen and what's been demonstrated. And ultimately, they did accept the letter and were able to apply the mature minor doctrine. And yeah, but a few months after that experience, something else, an opportunity arose, which was an opportunity to actually change the law, like to change the law on the books that was dealing with this exact issue called Senate Bill 5883. And Elizabeth, what is Senate Bill 5883 and what was your involvement in that advocacy?
Well, Senate Bill 5883 would allow unaccompanied minors to consent for themselves for routine health care. And my involvement in that is that I got to testify twice. And it was a great experience. I had a lot of fun. It was like the first time I was able to advocate and actually make a change. And so I'm still so proud of that moment, and just thinking that I was 15 at the time is actually crazy. Um and it also allowed other adults, like besides parents or legal guardians, to consent for the youth, like family members or like high or like school workers also. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's a good good thing I did.
Yeah. What was your experience testifying? Like how did it make you feel? What was challenging? What was rewarding about that experience?
Well, like I said, it was really rewarding to actually be able to make a change and help others like me or like in my situation who are unaccompanied minors to access healthcare, because I think that is a really big thing in life, and you can't go through life without taking care of yourself. And so yeah, but other times it was frustrating because there was people who were testifying against the bill, and I just thought like this really doesn't affect you, you know? And it's like it's really frustrating to hear that um they were going against the bill that would help a lot, like thousands and like a lot of minors in the future, and it's gonna stay in the law. I really hope so.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, it was great, but it was also frustrating.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad they passed it. So
Yeah. No, it was and you had your testimony was so powerful, Elizabeth, because you were like this literally like 6 months ago or however many months ago, if the laws were in the books, like that would have been a different experience for me, right? And so it you were able to tell that story as an expert who had to like move through life
Mm-hmm.
and experiencing the difficulties of not having this law. So it was awesome. If we can move to the next slide. So we've been sort of alluding to this throughout the conversation, which is, yes, lawyers are great. I'm biased, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. And if you just had a lawyer, it wouldn't be enough, right? So who else was there to support you?
The people that were there to support me was my family. So my older and younger brother. I'm still very close to them, so I'm really grateful for that. And Miss Nina, who we have talked about throughout this whole thing, she's the best. I'm currently still staying with her right now. Um, and my friends from school and like other programs that I've done, and my therapist individually and family, because when Miss Nina and I first met, we didn't really know each other. Besides, we had relationships with my grandma, who was my legal guardian, and so we wanted to make sure we were good fit. That's why we kind of needed a family therapist. And then a case manager who were working with the bills and financial support, which really helped my brother when he was having us in his place, and a lawyer for my younger brother who was going in a more, I would say, different situation because he had a legal guardian, so it's kind of harder to work around the system.
Yeah. Um, with Miss Nina, like when you reconnected with her and sort of you had built that relationship, ultimately you all both were like, I think we can make this work. But one of the legal challenges was that Miss Nina was working as a school staff person, right? For the public school, the very public school system. You were also a student. And so she wanted to make sure that it was official, right? So that she is doing everything she's supposed to do as a professional. And so I helped file for guardianship, right? For you and Miss Nina. If we can move to the next slide. So this is our last slide, and I want to make sure that your expertise is highlighted. So as an expert in this area, what are some important things to keep in mind, Elizabeth, for when people in this room are advocating for youth experiencing homelessness?
I would say that having the youth being able to choose their own goals is a really big thing for me because I don't like I just want to be able to like actually have some control in my life and it's such a difficult time. And so being able to have that kind of relationship with a lawyer, I think is really important. And being able to feel safe is also really important because if I'm like just like not trust like I'm not able to trust the person who I'm sharing sensitive information with, then what's the point, you know? Like how are you able to help me if I won't tell you what's going on? And then being heard, like working with someone rather than being told what to do, um, is a really big part because it's like a partnership. And for lawyers, the client is the boss, which was really empowering, I have to say. So yeah.
Yes. Um, if folks have any questions for Elizabeth and we're happy to answer them. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to pass along a question. So this is for Elizabeth, I think. You already talked, I think one of what were the most frustrating parts of the process. You did touch on some, but if there's other frustrations you want to share, but then what other kind of change would you like to see to make it easier for youth that find themselves in your position?
Oh, I would say the most frustrating part was hearing people talk about um hearing people talk about what it would be like to be in my situation, because it's like they haven't experienced it, you know, and it's like really frustrating to hear what they think they would have done, and like it's not a big deal. Like it was really frustrating. And another frustrating part was not really having like people around me truly understand my situation. That was really frustrating too, because I would be trying to explain it to them, and then they're like, "Oh, okay," but it's not. It's like, you know, I don't think they fully grasp it. So that was also really frustrating. And um, a kind of change I would like to see to make it easier for future endangered youth, I would say, um, definitely be able to promote different kind of legal services, or like other mental health services, or different services like what we're doing today. You know, I think that this is really helpful, and just making or bringing awareness to services.
That's a really good point, the information sharing piece. There's another question for you. So we read about plenty of youth who elect to drop out of school to support family or make money for rent. What was your motivation or support to continue to pursue your education?
Well, it's kind of personal, but my grandma would always say, you know, aim for higher. And so I thought, and I already had experience with like after school programs, like stipend, like kind of work. So I was like, you know, I could keep doing that, but also keep furthering my education. And so I just found myself looking for like different internships and different like paid work, and that would help, not like that would not just support me financially, but would also teach me like life skills. So yeah.
Amazing. This is a
Katie,
question for, oh, go
oh,
ahead.
yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead. No, sorry. I wanted to make my quick plug when we're done with questions. So if you if
We got at least time for another one or two. So I'm going to
okay, all
give you
right.
this one from the Q&A. This is for you, Ria. So how would you maintain your empathy when it comes to more difficult clients? Example, someone who is unresponsive or someone more aggressive.
Um, I I guess in terms of empathy, like I will say that I've never been exactly in the same situation as a particular client. So that's not how I would approach it, is like, you know, can I see myself in their shoes and what they're doing, and would I do what they're doing? I think the way that I approach it as an advocate and as attorney is like, how can I support them in the ways that they need, that they've identified that they need? And if they are communicating to their if they're being unresponsive, or if they're having a difficult time, you know, communicating what they need, then they're in a place where maybe that's the legal intervention, or that conversation in the moment is not the right time or the um, right moment to have that conversation. And I think what a big part of anyone doing this work, and especially at direct legal services, because we might not get that in our professional background, is trauma-informed advocacy. So really understanding how trauma shows up in conversations, in behaviors, and how do we, as support folks, like approach our conversations and our relationships with clients in a trauma-informed way. So I guess I would sort of like turn that into being like, I don't necessarily need to feel what that person is feeling to really understand the context of their behavior, or their unwillingness to engage, et cetera, so that I can think of like a different approach, or to give them the I guess the independence to say no, right? Just to be like, I'm not, I don't want this right now. And that is their prerogative.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to ask one more question for the legal nerds on the call. So one thing that occurs to me as I was hearing Elizabeth's story is sort of why you decided to go with the route. Like Washington, I know, has an emancipation statute. Did you guys consider emancipation? Sort of what were the pros and cons, and how did you decide on guardianship with Messina?
Do you want to take that, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I could take that.
Yeah.
So emancipation was like my top goal out of our relationship. However, there was this family friend that was taking in my younger brother for a little bit, and she was like, "Hey, do you want to come stay with us?" And I was like, "Okay, cool," because I wanted to stay with family, right? So, but then that ended up not happening, and then Messina reached out, and or no, I was already with Messina, my bad. But I just thought since Messina and I thing were like temporary that I would, yeah. So yeah, emancipation was like my top goal. However, I just think like life just has its ways. So I mean, Rhea, you can also add on if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, when you and I started, you were 15, right? And emancipation was at 16. And you're like, I can't wait that long to figure out what I'm going to do and where I'm going to stay. But we always had that on the back burner of like, maybe that'll be the plan once you turn 16. And it was a process, right? Because, and no shade on Miss Nina, who might be in the room today, is that it was like we had these sort of conversations of like, as you were developing a relationship with her, we were having, I don't know, maybe weekly, like, which button do we push today, right? Like, which legal button are we going to go towards? Because part of it was learning, was developing that relationship with Miss Nina, being like, can I trust this person to be my caregiver, or do I need to go this other legal route of emancipating so that, because maybe this isn't going to work out, right? Because it hadn't worked out with some other caregivers in the past. And so it was this sort of, we actually drafted an emancipation petition, right? Like we had support letters and we're like, all right, we've got both. Let's figure out which one. And it really was contingent on like how things were going with Miss Nina as you guys were like getting to know each other, as you had visits and you're like, okay, I'm starting to feel this way. And then ultimately, the guardianship was the direction you wanted, because you were like, at the end of the day, I want to stay with someone who I can trust and can take care of me. And so, and I was like, well, that's guardianship, right? That's not emancipation.
Amazing. Thank you both. That was great. So Rhea, if you want to go ahead and make your plug, please do.
So for folks who are attorneys in the room, we have several openings at Legal Counsel for Youth and Children. We serve youth experiencing homelessness, youth in foster care, youth accused of crimes for youth defense, and also immigrant youth throughout the state. And we have openings in King County, in Pierce County, Skagit, and Yakima. So whether or not you're in the state or, somewhere else in the country and willing to relocate to the Pacific Northwest and want to do this holistic direct legal services advocacy for young people like Elizabeth, please come join us. I would love for you to join our team. We are growing, and it's a really like dynamic place to work. And yeah, so just wanted to make that plug.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I think we can go to the next slide. And I will pass it along to Kelly Russo.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how a service provider or how other advocates or how youth are able to find an attorney like Rhea, a program like LCYC, and how can we ensure that the youth are getting access to the attorneys that they need. And that's where we come in. My name is Kelly Russo, and I am the director of the American Bar Association's Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. I've been working with the commission for about 8 years now, based in Washington, D.C., and really the focus of our work is to increase access to legal services, and a major component of that work really focuses around youth. It's through our Homeless Youth Legal Network, or as we lovingly refer to it as HYLN. HYLN really is aimed at really improving outcomes for youth that are experiencing homelessness by increasing both capacity and connectivity related to legal services. By way of background, several years ago, HYLN started with a mapping of what existed out there across the country in terms of unmet legal needs. So what types of legal needs were we seeing youth experience, and then what was out there in terms of legal service programs. Sadly, at the time, it was 2017, we were only able to really identify 30 organizations providing legal services for unaccompanied homeless youth in only 20 states, which meant that at that time, more than half the country didn't have any lawyers at all serving unaccompanied homeless youth. And clearly that's not okay. So since 2017, we've continued to update our directory. And over the last few months, it got a major upgrade as we worked in collaboration with the National Homelessness Law Center to make it a lot more user-friendly, look a lot better. It's now a map of the country where you can click in on your state, and then an updated list of providers, of legal service providers comes up. And then that way you can reach out to direct people within these organizations in order to find a lawyer that can help. So we'll continue to keep that resource updated. But in addition to our state-by-state directory, you can go to the next slide, please. We also provide technical assistance and trainings. So that's whether that's lawyers working with youth, service providers on how to engage lawyers, communities in general on how to increase legal services serving youth. We also do law and policy advocacy at the national, state, and local level. We have an active listserv, huge plug over here to join our listserv. It's not just lawyers, it has over 450 advocates nationwide. And really the listserv is a space where folks can ask law-related questions, or seek referrals, discuss policy initiatives, and share best practices, as well as webinars like this one. So we'll show you in the next few slides how to join our listserv, but I definitely encourage you to join. We also have 12 model programs. LCYC RIA's organization is actually one of our 12 model programs, which were identified early on in HYLN days. We've collected data from those programs and worked with them to help replicate additional good programs across the country. So data from those model programs can be found on our website as well. And then last but not least, we also have a library of resources. So we have webinars, videos, toolkits, reports, all of which you can find on our website. Next slide. This kind of shows you where everything can be found, ambar.org/HYLN. Everything there is free for you to use, and I definitely encourage you to check it all out. Through that website too, you can also find the directory of legal services. Next slide, please. One more thing to note are community roundtables. So HYLN organizes community roundtables all over the country. Really, it's an opportunity to network, strategy, information build, and really increase access to legal services related to education, justice system. The idea is really to bring together all of the people that touch the lives of youth, but might not necessarily be yet working together. We chat about different legal barriers that they're encountering, or just barriers in general, and how involving a lawyer might make things easier. So we've been to Las Vegas, Tampa, Denver, Detroit, etc., to really hold these conversations. And then what comes out of them totally depends on the community. In some communities, it's as simple as creating a legal referral list so that providers are able to say, oh, this youth needs an attorney, here's who I can call. Or it's led to ongoing conversations around state level advocacy, whether different state laws need to change in order to create more systemic, lasting change. Next slide, please. This is one of the resources that I always like to point out. This is basically your go-to guide on McKinney-Vento and education rights for youth. It's in an easy to read format. And it's available through our website at ambar.org/ESEH. It's in its 5th edition, and we produce it each year in collaboration with Schoolhouse Connection. So it's something that I always like to flag, particularly for those that are interested in education rights. Next slide, please. And last but not least, our star of the show in terms of publication resources, this is our new Model State Statutes resource. This is a free resource. It's available on our website at no cost. So you can download it there or shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to mail you a hard copy. I have plenty of them in my office. And what we did here was, this is in its 2nd edition. This time around, we collaborated heavily with 4 national organizations, as well as 4 local organizations that are providing legal services. And this really serves as a tool for any sort of state and local advocates that are either drafting new legislation supporting youth experiencing homelessness, or needing to tweak or rewrite existing legislation. This is a go-to guide that provides background as well as actual model state statutes that can be used at state level advocacy. Next slide, please. These are the list of partners that we worked with. As you can see, the National Homelessness Law Center is on there, as well as the Legal Counsel for Youth and Children, LCYC. So these were the different groups. And in addition to working with these partners and working together to draft the different chapters, we also held 2 larger stakeholder roundtable virtual convenings so that we could get even greater input. These were led by youth, so youth were involved in the drafting of the publication, and we had these broader groups too together to say, here's what you're missing, here's something that's suggested. It was an extremely collaborative process. So all of these partners came together and produced this new resource. Next slide. And here I will pass it over to Gabriella McDonald with Texas Appleseed. Gabby was one of our authors and editors of the Model State Statutes Handbook, and in her day job, she does youth advocacy work on the state level in Texas. So she's going to talk a little bit more about the publication itself and then kind of how it could be used in communities across the country like her own. So take it away, Gabby.
Thank you, Kelly. Like Kelly said, I'm Gabriella McDonald, and I'm the Deputy Director at Texas Appleseed. Prior to that, I was our Pro Bono and New Projects Director. And because of that, I had the privilege to really bring up youth homelessness as an issue that we should address on the policy level, because it's not something that a lot of organizations who deal specifically with this population have time to think about. So our job as thinking about this on a policy level is to really make everybody's job on the ground easier, and especially make sure that youth have all the resources that they need and the access that they need to all of the various systems that should be serving them effectively. And so I'm really grateful to have been able to work on this Model State Statutes book as a member of the Commission on Homelessness and Poverty with Kelly. And so, like Kelly said, there are 15 different chapters here. You can see these are wide ranging and really vary on all of the ways that a youth could need support, including, immigration, vital records, access to custodial care, exiting systems. And each of these topics, each of these chapters has sub-issues. So for example, the access to healthcare section doesn't just talk about healthcare as getting access to it, but medical consent and getting health insurance and what the various types of medical care and youth can work and to access and consent to. The LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus chapter has discussions on expanding services to this population and healthcare specifically for this population, as well as, the overlapping issues of child welfare and juvenile justice. And then there are things like the actual draft statute, the Homeless Youth Rainbow Safety Act. So each of these chapters encompasses a bunch of information on a wide variety of topics within each of these 15 subjects. So next slide. And there are a lot of ways that you will be able to use this, and I'm going to just kind of talk about those right now. And this is just a brief, tiny section of the consent for necessary services. It really talks about a definition contained in there, but it's just an example of some of the stuff you will find in the chapters. And I will say each chapter has an intro about the issue that really discusses best practices, common barriers, what other states are doing, any important statistics. And so you in your state can use that intro section to really create your resources for sharing with legislatures or sharing with legislators in your state, or sharing with, you know, whoever, the school district or city council, wherever you're trying to change the rules to be closer to the model state statute. And so this can be used to create state-specific resources for your advocacy, or creating one-pagers. And you can take those statistics that are mostly national. There are some state statistics in there, but take mostly the national statistics that are in there and adapt them to your state if you can find them. If you can't find them, that might be a great opportunity to say, hey, the state should be tracking this, so we know what it is and figure out what agency should be responsible for that. Additionally, there's narrative, just arguments about some of the ways that youth really need to be supported. And again, you can take that and adapt it to put out information about whatever, statute you want to advocate for. Additionally, after the intro with all of the best practices and such, there's the actual draft state statute. And so each state statute includes a short title. It's usually something kind of catchy that, legislators like to say, I passed the so-and-so act, and it's an act you've heard of because it's catchy and great sounding and has an acronym. But it sounds silly, but it can be important to have just a good, catchy title for your stuff. The purpose each statute has a purpose section. And then lastly, each statute definitely has a definition section. And we know that not everybody in the homelessness advocacy space will always agree on the definition of homelessness. I mean, we have the HUD definition, the educational definition, and the medical definition, and all of that. But what we try to do in this draft model state statute is to be as broad as possible. We want as many youth to have access to those resources as they can. And we understand that if you're going to take it back to your state and your state's not particularly really ready to go all the way with the broad definition, you've got somewhere to go with modifying how you might need to take that. And hopefully over time, you'll convince people having these conversations, gathering the data, that you should be using the broad definition, and we can all get there to serve as many youth as possible. So just wanted to share that. And then the other thing to note is that each statute, not each statute, but statutes where it makes sense, has alternatives to, some of the statute that are available. And so in the consent for necessary services, the alternatives is to talk about the Emancipation of Minors Act, because, if you're not going to be able to contract as a minor who still technically has a guardian who's responsible for you, then emancipation may be the answer. And so there's a statute that will deal with that. The last thing I will say on this slide is there are a couple of keys to these statutes, and there are things that people often will neglect or forget that make them kind of useless. And so when we were drafting these model state statutes, we wanted to make sure that they were not useless, that they were going to serve the purposes that we wanted them to serve. And so the first of the three is that we wanted somebody to be responsible for taking whatever action it is we were asking the state or the county or a nonprofit to do. And so there is somebody who is defined as being required to take the action for whatever it is in the statute. The second really important piece that is necessary to making any of these statutes function is funding. People are very afraid to ask for funding, but if you don't ask for funding when you are drafting the statute, you're not going to have any money to do what it is you need to do. So you have to ask for funding. And we have done that in every place that we think we can in these model state statutes. And then the third piece is enforcement mechanisms. It's always great when we're like, okay, we have somebody who's responsible for doing this. We have the money to do this. Nobody's still doing this. How do we make them do this? Well, it's necessary to put in the statute the enforcement action that makes sure that something that's required to be done is getting done. And so wherever we've seen possible to put in these model state statutes, we've tried to put some sort of enforcement mechanism that will make it actively doable, so that we are ensuring that everybody involved is doing what they're supposed to do. So next slide. And this next slide is just a couple more examples of what's in the model state statutes. And, you know, on exiting systems, one other key important piece to this is not just supporting youth who are currently experiencing homelessness, but prevention. And we know one of the biggest areas where youth are likely to encounter homelessness is leaving the child welfare system, or leaving the juvenile justice system, or leaving a state mental health hospital. And so we have put in these places in this model state statutes that, you know, a youth shouldn't leave care without having housing and employment support and other wraparound services. Or when they're leaving the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system, maybe your state should be considering tuition waivers for those students so that they can have the support that they need to be able to survive and move forward in their lives and succeed in their lives. The other example that I like to give is the vital documents example. You know, exiting systems is one, but having your ID when you leave those systems or access to your birth certificate is incredibly important. And the number of administrative barriers that can be put in place to be able to get these vital documents that are essential to move through society in every possible way is really important. And so it's really funny to me because I've worked with a couple of other Appleseeds. There are 17 other Appleseeds, by the way, throughout the country. So go ahead and check out if you've got one, and maybe you can partner on advocacy. But partnering with a couple of their Appleseeds, we've worked on an ID report, and all of us who were working on the report, all 5 of us who were working on the report, talked about a barrier we encountered to get our ID. And it's really difficult to be able to go around and figure out, if you don't know where you were born, how are you supposed to get your birth certificate? So in these model state statutes, we've tried to remove as many administrative barriers as we can. And I will say it can be really, really rewarding. And I'll give you an example of the funding that's important in that. Because in Texas, what we've been able to do is basically when somebody goes and renews their ID, they're able to donate to a fund that's specifically for youth experiencing homelessness or former foster youth, so that their IDs are absolutely free. And now that fund that we were able to create and now make sure that youth are able to get their IDs for free has enough money in it to also support drivers' education for free. And so we're in the process of working with the Texas Workforce Commission to really figure out how to make sure youth are able to access those driver's ed classes at no cost to them, so that they can then get a job that will support themselves and be a benefit to all of us. And so those are just some examples of what's in the model state statutes. And so I will ask to go to the next slide. So again, just a reminder, join the Homeless Youth Legal Network listserv if you can. It would be fantastic. It's a great resource to ask questions, legal questions and concerns, share webinars like this. If you're interested in the Model State Statutes resource, you can go to ambar.org/MSS for Model State Statutes, of course. And again, easy way to get to ambar.org/HYLN for the Homeless Youth Network listserv. And then if you turn one more slide for me, if you got any questions at all or missed any of that, please reach out to Kelly. She is super responsive, super knowledgeable. We'll be able to share with you if you're in a certain state, she knows of a program, she can do that. So not only can you reach out to the ABA HYLN, but you can also reach out to Kelly Russo directly. And with that, I will see if there are any questions for myself or Kelly.
Awesome. Thank you. So we actually have a comment just pointing out a helpful piece of legislation for unaccompanied youth age 16 to 17 is allowing a responsible adult to complete the parent attestation that a youth has completed the drive hours required to get their license. And so it's just a responsible adult, doesn't have to be a guardian, it sounds like, and this is just passed in Washington. So just sharing that information, and isn't a potential maybe model for other states to think about.
Very cool.
Very awesome. All right. Well, thank you both. I don't think we have any other questions. I know. Oh, Kelly, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to mention to everyone too, if you take a look at our directory and don't see a program in your state that you know is there, that should be included in our directory, please complete the survey. If you go to the links that we shared, or just ambar.org/HYLN. You'll be able to find the link to the survey, or just shoot me an email to let me know. We want to make sure we're really collecting all of the different programs and making sure that they're available there in our directory. So if we're missing a program that you know of that should be included, just reach out to me, fill out the survey, or shoot me an email. And we really appreciate you keeping us up to date and making sure the directory is as inclusive as possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And just, you may be hearing from Kelly and I after this, because our call to action, I think, is if you are an attorney or legal aid program, please make sure that the youth providers in your area know that you exist and are able to accept referrals from them if you are. And then also, if you are a youth provider, making sure that you develop relationships with the legal aid programs in your community. You can start with the Homeless Youth Legal Network directory, get in touch with some of those programs, because it really is helpful. Like when you actually have a young person before you with a legal problem, to know like the name of an attorney that you can immediately connect with, rather than when you're in a crisis situation and trying to find someone. So really encourage the outreach going both ways, from legal service providers and other providers. All right, we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to just take a minute to plug an event that's coming up, the virtual State of the Movement, June 13th or 12th and 13th. This is sponsored by Away Home America, although it is a bunch of different national organizations are coming together to put on this event, which essentially is a convening to assess the current state of the movement to end youth homelessness and to work together to strategize and combine our efforts. And so one thing I'll just point out, they have an open call for proposals. And this is not only for like speakers and people who want to run workshops at the event, but also for performers. And they do offer payment for youth with lived experience who would be in those roles. There was an amazing poet at the event last year. So please spread the word about this event. Please attend. And then also let any young people, if you're on this call or that you work with, let them know about the opportunity to potentially present or perform at this event. All right, let's go to the next slide. And then finally, I'll just say that a lot of the resources that we talked about today, you can also find them on the youthstateindex.com. There's a resources tab where you can click on legal help and find the map that Kelly was talking about to access the Homeless Youth Legal Network directory folks in your state. There's also a tab for under the resources tab for the Model State Statutes. You can search it by chapter. So if you don't want to have to go through the whole publication, you can just get to the chapter that you need from there. And then also it's a place where you can look up information about the policies that are in your state that affect homeless youth and see how your state scores on those. There's a bibliography for every policy. So you can actually look and see like, what are the citations of the law? What does the law actually say? And then also we have under the resources tab, a live tracking where you can look and see like laws that are being proposed this legislative session that might affect unhoused youth and young adults. So anyway, please feel free to use that resource. It is there for you, and we're always open to feedback onto how to make it better and more useful. All right, that is all for our presentation today. Thank you so much for our speakers. We really appreciate everything that you did and the time you put in to make this presentation happen. Once the Zoom ends, a survey will pop up for you. This is an optional survey, no pressure, but it does help us. It collects some demographic information so that we know who we're reaching and where. And thank you again for coming. Thanks all. Have a wonderful evening.